Spanning the entire globe, involving hundreds of different cultures, explaining the same phenomenon by different names.
The nature of the footprints, namely their remarkable consistency, their biomechanical appropriateness, those aspects that are extremely compelling.
Hey everyone, good evening or good afternoon, depending on where you're at. Welcome to the Bigfoot Influencers. I'm Tim.
And I'm Dina.
We are thrilled that you're joining us today, and we're excited to be here. Just got a lot going on. The weather's turning, and we're just having a great time.
It's turning for the good, though.
It is. It's turning for the good.
We probably spent the whole day outside today.
Yeah, well,
working on the yard. Yeah, well, you were working in your office.
Right. Yeah. Don't tell the boss I snuck outside once in a while. Right?
Yeah. Yep. So we had a good day. The weather's getting warmer, so we're super excited, as I'm sure you guys are too. All of you guys who like to go hiking and Bigfooting, it's getting warmer, so it's nice.
And we want to invite you all to head on over to thebigfootinfluencers.com. We've got tons of new content that we're putting up all the time. We're adding all of our videos and our audio from our podcast and any podcast that we are participating on. We recently had a really cool one with Kristen Amanda.
Ooh,
and that was
really cool.
Paranorm Girl podcast, and that was so fun. She's amazing.
She is really amazing. She's got a great voice.
Yeah, she does perfect for
this. I want to get like a fierce microphone. Like, do we sound that fierce? I don't think so.
But we're going to share things, I think on all of our social media outlets, you can find that podcast. Again, it's Paranorm Girl podcast, and you'll see it. We're going to get it out there, so you guys check that out too. So tonight, though, we're excited.
Yeah, because we have Shane Carpenter woo, woo, from Missouri. So we're super excited about hearing from him. Why are you looking at me like that?
Oh,
okay. Because I'm listening. I talked to Shane. He's from Missouri. All right. Because we're going to Missouri in August, and Shane, you better make sure that we meet up and you take us Bigfooting.
So Shane is, he probably doesn't need any introduction. But for those who may be new to the podcast, may not know who Shane is, he's been investigating the subject for years. He's documented some fascinating evidence. He's got 3 research areas. The one he's most probably well known for is an area in Missouri that they call the 400, and he'll get into that too. But he's been on television shows, documentaries. He was named the 2022 Bigfooter of the Year by the Bigfoot Times. And we're just excited to have him in.
We are super excited.
We're going to bring him in. We're not going to wait. And we're going to have Shane join us.
Yay, Shane. Hey, Shane. Welcome to the party.
Let me get you off mute here. You're on mute.
Hold on a second. You're still on mute.
Yep, I couldn't.
There we go.
Got him. Okay. Hey, Shane.
How you doing?
Hello.
Welcome to the show. Thanks for being here. We're so excited about having you.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, and you're in your RV right now, right?
Yes, I'm in an RV right now. I'm staying out of town, not too far away, but far enough that I don't want to drive. So yeah, we're hanging out in an RV and just taking it easy of the evenings at this point.
Good.
Dedication. Thank you.
That
for
is
joining us,
dedication.
Shane,
Thank you. We do appreciate that. So, can you share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm 48, getting ready to turn 49.
Oh my God, you're so old.
Yeah.
No, I'm joking.
I physically feel old.
That's about the time where it starts happening.
Well, my body's been kind of going downhill for a few years at this point. I've done a lot of wild and crazy and fun stuff over the years, and had a few surgeries and broken quite a few bones, and but I've had a lot of fun doing it, you know. So those are starting to turn into aches and pains, and reminded me of my younger years, you know.
Isn't that something, Shane? Though, when we don't think about it when we're younger because things just catch up. I mean, it's back, my knees, and I got all kinds of stuff going on too. That when you're young, you say you're invincible, but then you know, you just don't think about it when you're young.
Yeah, that's what I tell a lot of my friends. I think like this is the time, like, because you said you're 48.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's like watching a building crumble in slow motion, basically.
Right. Yeah, that's how it kind of feels too.
Yeah. But hey, we can still have fun because we're still young, you know, we're still young. We're not old. I mean, people live forever now, so you're not old, honey. You got a lot more crumbling to do. Don't worry.
As long as I can get around in the woods, I'm good.
Yeah.
That's it.
Walking, you know,
hiking, whatever.
That's definitely something that old people can do.
So and you'll always be younger than us, Shane, so you don't have to worry about catching up. So
well, that makes me feel better.
There you go.
So for the audience that may not know, because we got a ton to get into tonight, and we're going to get into some really cool things. But for the audience that may not know you, you know, maybe briefly, how did you get into this subject?
Well, I'm from West Plains, Missouri originally. It's kind of south central Missouri, and my aunt and uncle lived out in the country. They used to watch me a lot during the summer, and my uncle had a dog named Sam, and this dog would run out and chase deer, and he would disappear sometimes. But my uncle had this unreal whistle. He could whistle so loud. It used to amaze me as a child, you know, hearing him whistle. But typically he could just whistle, and within 20 or 30 minutes, Sam, his dog, would show back up. And this particular day, he didn't show back up, and he asked me to run out to the woods and holler at Sam and see if I could get him to come back. He didn't come back. He assumed that he was probably running deer because he did that a lot. So long story short, I had to cross this field, the fenced-in field with a pond in the middle of it. I crossed this field, and I go into the wood line, and I'm hollering for Sam. And this particular wood line runs almost east and west, runs kind of a little southeast and northwest, but for the most part, east and west. I'm inside the wood line. I'm hollering for Sam, and he's not responding. And so I started kind of walking eastward, and at some point, as I'm going eastward, I started just getting these really weird vibes, and I started becoming kind of spooked. And I just remember feeling this vibe in the air almost. And at a certain point, I stopped, and I kind of honed in on this tree, and like in the back of my mind, I knew something was behind this tree. Like I already knew it was there. And then it stepped out from behind the tree. And at the time, I was only 10 years old. This was in 1984. So at the time, I didn't know what I was looking at. I hadn't heard of Bigfoot or Sasquatch at that point. And I'm staring at this thing that is larger than me, like adult size. At this point, you know, I realized it was a juvenile, but back then I didn't know what I was looking at. All I know is it was adult size, and it was covered in hair, and it was staring at me. It was only about a 10 to 15 second ordeal of us just standing there and staring at each other. And then it turned around kind of nonchalantly, walked up over and crested the hill. And as soon as it crested the hill, that's when like the fear and anxiety kicked in. And I turned around and hauled butt, you know, out of the woods and back through the field. And as I'm coming across the field, I could see that my dad had shown up while I was out in the woods. And so I'm screaming his name and bawling. And by the time I get through the fence behind the house, he was out on the porch. He had heard me. The front door was open, and it was the middle of the summer. I don't remember exactly what month it was, but it was sometime during the summer. I believe it was after July, because I think I'd already celebrated my birthday at this point. So I was a newer 10-year-old.
So how did your uncle react when you came back to the house so upset?
And Dad.
Or Dad,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
both of them.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, he was trying to calm me down and settle me down. Is at this point I just ran as hard as I could across this huge field, and in panic mode and fear mode also, so my adrenaline, and by the time I got to him, I couldn't even hardly talk. I was breathing so hard and trying to catch my breath and crying.
You're probably breaking Olympic records.
Possibly.
Yeah, adrenaline can make you do some crazy stuff. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I know. I've experienced it several times over the years. But he just, first and foremost, he just tried to calm me down. Eventually we got inside and he took me in the back room and was asking me what was wrong. And after I calmed down and settled, I started explaining to him what had just happened and what I'd just seen. And he basically tried to convince me that I was just young and impressionable and was seeing shadows and was letting fear kind of run my mind, and which was kind of silly at the time, thinking back on it, because like we were in the woods often. I was already at that point, I was already learning to hunt and track, and so being in the woods was kind of a normal thing. Like we had tree houses and off in the woods, and me and my friends and my cousins, we played in the woods all the time. So it was kind of a silly thing for him to even think that I just got spooked or something, because it had never happened before. I was comfortable in the woods. And so it just got to a point where I quit trying to convince him and he was trying to convince me, so I just kind of gave up at that point. And from that point forward, of course I didn't like going into the woods. I got a little, sketched out and fearful of the woods for a time. And at some point in my life, I just kind of put that away and locked it in a vault in the back of my head and just kind of went on about life. Never really got back into hunting too much. I would here and there over the years, but I was kind of uncomfortable being in the woods alone at times,
Hey,
and
Shane,
not that I didn't go into the woods after that, because I did, but I was always had that fear that this was going to happen again,
Yeah, I just want to kind of get your, I know you were 10 years old and it was a long time ago, but I know it was a significant moment. So can you describe what you saw?
Yeah.
In more detail?
Yeah. So it had a round head. The hair laid down somewhat. The hair was 2.5, maybe 3 inches long. Its skin the skin on his face was darker than the other exposed skin that I could see. But for the most part, I was so stuck at looking I was stuck in the mode of looking at this thing in its eyes, and it was looking back at me in the eyes, and it was real mono-faced, had no expression on its face. It had a hooded nose. The hair covered most of its face, but the hair was, thinner, like on the cheekbone area and around the mouth. And there were areas it was thin enough to almost look like there may not be hair there, and, or you could see the skin through it. Its lips were fairly flat from what I remember. It was maybe 5.5 foot tall, six max. And it's let's see, it had more of I don't know if I may have already said this, but it had more of a round head than what you typically hear. Like you hear the conical shaped heads. For whatever reason, I walked away from that later, assuming that it was a male. And one of I shouldn't say assuming, one of the things that I remember when it was walking away is, as it crested up the hill, I could see what looked to be a penis, somewhat. Could have been just hair, but other than that, for some reason, I walked away from that situation, assuming or thinking that it was a male that I just came face to face with. What I didn't know, I didn't know what it was, but but it seemed that way to me. It never showed its teeth. Like I said, it didn't really show any expression on its face. It was just kind of stone faced, probably like I was. And that was about it. The brow ridge wasn't as overpronounced as you hear some people talking about. The eyes were inset, but the brow ridge wasn't like ginormous or anything. And the forehead, from where I was standing and looking up at it, the forehead was short, I assume because of some slope, on the forehead itself. I can't say for sure, but just, visually trying to remember that moment and kind of looking up at it. The way everything was situated is it was a slight incline up to that tree, and that tree was only about 30 feet away from me, maybe. And so it was on a slight incline going up to that tree, and so I was kind of set below it, standing below where it was to an extent also.
Well, you may have been the first human that it had seen ever too. That might have been why you were in a stare down.
Possibly, I've wondered many things about that situation and why it occurred, and I have nothing. I have nothing other than just a 15-second visual encounter with the thing.
It's a long one though. I mean,
Oh
that's
my
pretty.
gosh.
Yeah, that's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
And
Yeah.
it's such an impression. Like that was an age where,
Mhm.
you're preteen, you're not a toddler. So it's just something that you remember well and leaves a huge impression for sure.
Yeah. The eyes were very dark, and they were a brown color, like a deep dark brown. I have brown kind of hazel eyes, and they were like much darker, like a deep dark brown color. I mean, that's about it. It's
So then how long did it take you? Obviously you said you didn't go back in the woods right away, but how long did it take you to go from that moment to really start getting into following the subject or just collecting data or whatever you did after that related to Bigfoot?
like I said, I kind of just put that out of my mind at some point, probably, leading into my teens, probably just lock and key. It's gone. I didn't think about it. And in 2013, just kind of on a whim on a Friday night, I asked my wife, what do you think about going for a hike in the morning, getting up early and trying to get out as the sun is rising and, get on a trail somewhere. And she said, let's do it. So I got on Google Earth and searched for some places to go hike that would be kind of, less populated, less people. And I found a spot, and the next morning we got up bright and early and took off. And a friend of one of my kids stayed the night. So we had an extra kid with us. So we had my 3 boys and an extra boy. And we got out there, we took off. We were, maybe coming up on 2 miles out and having a great time. And we're walking along and the boys are out in front of us. And I all of a sudden start getting this weird feeling again. And I say again, because as soon as I started feeling this, I immediately recognized it. And like a chill went up my spine, and in my mind, in my mind, I'm thinking, please no, please don't be what I think this could be. And for whatever reason, I stopped and I took a left off the trail into the woods and went in just a ways, and I started scanning. And as I scanned across to my right, there was this down tree in a thicket, and I could see for sure 3, possibly a 4th head, conical shaped. Well, 3 of them were conical, and one of them was more round shaped, peeking over this thicket. And immediately, I like kind of went into panic mode. I say panic mode, but I'm a real calm and collected person.
You were panicked on the inside.
Yes, panicking on the inside for sure, because my wife and kids were with me.
Right.
And so I immediately went back out to the trail. I told my wife we need to turn around and go back now. And then I hollered at the kids, "Hey guys, I was trying to act nonchalant, like nothing was wrong and nothing was going on. I didn't want the kids to know anything was up, And so my wife just went along with it. She knew something was up, but she also knew just how I was acting and that, she just needed to go along with the program for the moment, and she would find out later, so.
But see, she's a good wife, because I would be like, "What, baby? What? What's going on? What did you see? Did you see something?" So she's
Right.
good.
Well, we kind of have a thing like when we go places, I'm a very observant person. Like I'm one of these people that when we go to a restaurant, I sit where I can see the front door. I'm one of those. Yeah. Right. So I'm one of those people.
But
So
Cheers
but
to
I
that,
would
we-
still be like, "What did you see, baby? What's going on?" So you're good.
well,
Or she's good.
she understood that I was trying to. I didn't want the kids to understand that anything was a foul or anything.
dangerous,
So
right.
yeah. So she just rolled with it, and we hiked out. We stopped at the creek that we had crossed on the way in, and took some pictures. And there's some anomalies in the background of those pictures, actually. And those two anomalies I later saw visually with my own eyes, but I didn't know it at the time. But this is after looking at the pictures after we got home. And of course, my wife, as soon as we get home and the kids are around, she's like, "Okay, what the heck happened? What was going on? Why did we just abruptly leave like that?" And so at this point, I'd never told my wife what had happened to me when I was 10. So first and foremost, I just had to stop and tell my wife this story of what had happened to me when I was 10 years old. And then I had to tell her that I just, for a second time, possibly seen the same things, except more of them than I'd experienced when I was a kid. And like the worst part about that whole situation was like telling my wife this story and hoping that she believed me and didn't think I was crazy, like
Right.
she'd already married to me at this point. She can't back out, I mean, I guess she could, but
Right.
you understand what I'm saying. It was,
Yeah.
it was a weird moment, just hoping that she believed me and didn't think I was losing my mind. And, she accepted it. I did snap a few pictures also of these heads that were popped up, and there's not much to them. This was in 2013, and all I had on me was my phone, and the camera phones back then were terrible,
Right.
So
Yeah.
anyway, a whole nother story. But so that night, after discussing that with my wife, I just decided that, like, I knew at that point, if I didn't go back there, that I may not go into the woods again, because the feeling that I had when I saw those heads sticking up, I didn't want to experience again. And it was a different feeling too, because I had my wife and kids with me, so it was like protective husband and
Right.
father kicking in, And so after having some discussions with my wife about it, I decided that I was going to take the next few days off from work, and I worked for myself at the time. So the next morning, that was July 1st, was the next morning, and or no, that happened on July 4th, or on July 1st. I'm sorry. So the next morning, July 2nd, I was out there at sunup by myself, and I hiked right out back to the same exact spot where I'd walked into the woods, and I went up and started exploring this small cliff that got bigger as it went down towards the northeast. And that first day, I started having, I started experiencing what I thought was something trailing me at one point. At another point, I felt like I had something up and to my left. I was literally out there from sunup until about 5:30, 6 o'clock that afternoon, just exploring and getting to know the place. And I kept getting these weird vibes, and had a couple stick breaks that had happened, outside of my peripheral. And so then basically for the next 3 days, I was out there from sun up till almost sundown, just exploring, getting to know the place. And I decided to, I was confident that these things were out there and that they were trailing me at times just after being there those first few days. And so I decided that I was just going to set up a hike through the woods off trail out there, and I was going to just go back as often as I could, which, you know, turned into at least every Sunday after that. And sometimes it would be 2 or 3 days a week, but every Sunday for sure. And I would go out and I would do the same hike. And the idea was to, it wasn't just for them, but it was for me too. I was trying to make myself predictable, so that they would get comfortable if they were following me and pacing me, getting ahead of me at times, that they would have common places that they may go to watch me going through and whatnot. And I thought over time that they would either make mistakes and, you know, I would start catching on to some of these areas, or they would leave tracks near the trail or crossing the trail behind me or ahead of me, and I may pick up on those in the next day or whatever. And also to just be super familiar with my surroundings. You know, after walking that same trail, or I shouldn't say trail, but that same hike that I set up, 20 times, I started noticing when things would be out of place from the week before or the day before. And that's when I started noticing changes and things that looked to be manipulated and changed purposely. And it was almost as if they were doing things to see if I would pick up on it and notice them. It was kind of how I was interpreting things at that time. And then after some time, the interaction started. After I spotted one of them one day, it's like it's almost like it wasn't by accident, because it was a moment when it stopped and I had stopped, and it glared through the woods at me for just a moment, like we made eye contact, and then it bolted. And from that point forward, like, the interaction got crazier and crazier, and they would, started getting closer. Instead of staying 30, 40 yards away, they were coming in to 20 yards in certain areas where it was thicker. And I set up a bait station. It was a closed system, and after about a year out there, they would literally, I was leaving protein bars and granola bars, and they would open it up, take the bars out, put the wrappers back in, and close it back up. And I actually, when I got into the 400 and set up the same situation and did the same things, that eventually happened there too, crazy enough. But yeah, just like from that point forward, I was like, I dove in head first. I was obsessed with it, and part of it was kind of like facing my fears, and then it became an obsession of trying to figure out what these things were, what they ate, if they had speech, just anything and everything I could learn. I wanted to learn it at that point.
Yeah, and that was definitely one of the questions that we wanted to ask you tonight was, to dive into your theories on the family structure of the animals that you've been researching in Missouri. And, first though, how did you, obviously, why do you call it the 400?
So the 400, it's a 400-acre property. It's surrounded by some federal land and a couple other very large properties, and it's has a creek that runs through it, fresh water. It's all spring fed, and just a perfect place for these things. There's fruit trees. There's just crazy amounts of berries. There's pawpaw trees. The amount of deer that are on the property is just insane. So
when you say fruit trees, are these like natural fruit trees, or they're just like, like a human planted trees that have just been left there?
Yeah, some of them have been planted over the years. So this particular property has been in the family since 1826, I believe, is when they took the property, and it's been passed down, through some of the family members over time, and eventually to the guy that I deal with, who owned it, and he passed a couple of years ago, actually, and I deal with his wife now, and she's been kind enough to let us continue on with what we're doing out there, because she's trying to kind of honor her husband's wishes. And he was at first, when I got called into the situation, he was scared to death of what was happening because he didn't understand what was going on. And a friend of his pulled me into the situation, thinking that it may be possible Bigfoot, activity that was happening. And
because he was having experiences himself on the property.
Yeah, not only him, but some of his friends that would be with him. What actually happened was they saw some figures on the property one night, and he actually thought for quite some time before I got involved that he had poachers on his land because the amount of deer on his property. And he was finding structures, and he assumed that these poachers were building, little blinds and stuff to hide in off of deer trails and whatnot. And he was tearing those structures down. And he had one particular holler that he allowed a company to come in and cut down a bunch of trees. And after that particular thing is when stuff started happening. He would be out in front of his cabin, and rocks would be thrown from the woods behind his cabin to the front, when him and his friends would be out there. They come up and beat on the back of his cabin one night, almost tore the flue out of the back of the cabin. They started building structures up in the woods right behind his place, and he was starting to get to a point where he was freaking out because he didn't understand what was happening. And the guy that brought me into the situation, the friend of his, kind of tried to explain to him, and his friend made the offer to contact me and bring me out and let me check out the situation, and that's what happened. And at this point, it was kind of a blessing, because in my old research area that we were discussing earlier, I had garnered a bunch of great things happen there. Like I was seeing these things fairly consistently and getting tracks, and had this bait station thing going. And one day I decided that I was going to try to get proof, and I needed video and pictures to show somebody so I could talk about it, right? Because I didn't want to just tell people about it and have nothing to back up what I was saying, because then I'm the crazy Bigfoot guy. So I'm like, I'm going to do this. So long story short, I chased one of the juvies one day. It was actually the female. And after I chased her that day, everything stopped. And from that point forward, I was finding their tracks less often. Literally everything just stopped dead in the water. So I continued out there for a while, and I kind of realized at a point that, this is over out here. And it wasn't maybe 8 months later that I got the call to go out to the 400.
So I'm sorry, real quick, because I just wanted to know the answer to the first part of my question, which was your theory on the family structures.
Yeah, so that's kind of evolved over time. In my old research area, from what I could tell, it was a family structure. There was a large adult male, large adult female. I got to visually see both of them. I got a picture of the female at one point. There were two juveniles. There were actually three, but one of them I only saw once, and I only saw its tracks one time, and they were 6-inch tracks. The other two juvies were the ones that were really interacting with me, and they seem to be very close in age, which that'll tie into some of what I'll talk about probably later. It seems to be a common thing that there's two juveniles in a family unit that are very close in age. We're seeing that in 3 different areas right now, and twice in the 400 actually also. And so it seems as though, from what I can tell, and this isn't going to be a constant, because you have to assume that there's males that are going to be out looking for mates, and maybe possibly females also. We don't know how the things work with them as far as their social structure, But it seems as though that these things do live in family units. It's the same thing in the 400. When I first got out there, it was actually the same exact situation, crazy enough. When I first got out there, there was 2 adults, 2 juveniles. One seemed to be male, one seemed to be female. And then about a year and a half later, we started finding 6-inch tracks. And that's been a commonality. It's been we have another research area north of me, and I just went out there here a while back, and we had, in the mud flat, we had over 300 tracks of 3 individuals. One of them had 6-inch tracks. One of them had 9.5, and one of them had like 10 3/4 going on 11. And so that's been a commonality that we're seeing when it comes to the family structure. It seems as though
those are 3 young ones, because 10.5-inch track would probably be smaller than a mother, correct?
Right. Yeah. So when we got under the 400 originally, I was finding the mother's tracks as far as the 2 adults go. I was finding her tracks first, and at the time her tracks were only like 12 inches, and there were 2 juveniles. And of course, I'm just assuming that she gave birth to those 2 juveniles, that I started finding the tracks of almost immediately. It's, there's a lot of assumption in this, but at this point we've seen this 3 different times, actually 4 times, but in 3 places fairly consistently. There always seems to be 2 adults as far as the tracks go. And then there always seems to be, we quit finding the juvies tracks once they start getting her up around 11 inches. That's when we quit seeing them. And I say that because recently this summer, we were out of the 400 for a while, like during COVID, and I got sent to out of state for work for a bit. And when we came back, me and Randy had already discussed the possibility of these 2 juveniles that we were interacting with in the 400 at some point possibly leaving and going and doing their own thing. And this summer, that seems or I should say last summer, it seems as though that happened. We're not finding their tracks anymore. So unfortunately, those are the 2 that we were getting all the interaction from, and those 2 are now gone. The one that had 6-inch tracks is now about 9.5, which sticks with the growth rate that we're seeing fairly consistently in the juveniles. We're seeing at about an inch to 1.25 inches of growth rate per year in these tracks of the juvies that were out there. And we're seeing, and it's staying pretty consistent with this other, the one that had 6-inch tracks. It's now 9.5. We were gone for about 3 years, 2 3/4, 3 years, and now they're, 9.5. So it sticks with it. And now we have new 6-inch tracks out there also.
That's cool. So Shane, I'm gonna pause you, because for some of the audience that may not know how, and I'm gonna share some photos here too of some tracks. How do you know that 6-inch track is the same individual as the 9-inch track?
So some of it I cannot say 100% and positively, because I didn't get to see that track, year to year go from 6 to 9.5 inches. So there's some assumption there as far as that particular track goes. When we got his tracks, when it was when they were 6 inches, there definitely was not enough detail to say that these tracks are the same individual. We're assuming that because the same 2 adults are there, and there's a new set of 6-inch tracks, and the growth rate is correct. The growth rate goes along with everything that we've collected data wise since we've been out there over about a 6-year period now.
Okay, no, that's great. That's great information.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the trackways a little more. So actually, let me share this. I'm going to share a couple things here. Actually, so explain. Can you share with the audience what this is here? I mean,
yeah. So
it's a print. But
yeah. So that is a track that that's out of a trackway. The trackway had about a little over 100 tracks in it. We have these mud flats near this creek, and when the water goes down, these guys come out and collect mussels. And when they do this, all I have to do is have good timing and be out there when the water is going down, and we'll usually get these trackways. And so it's some of it's luck, of course, but we're in like a holy grail situation of being able to get these juvenile tracks and get them year to year. So this was out of a trackway that we pulled last year. I believe it was early October or just before October, and we were within 48 hours of these tracks being laid. And I say that because it had rained for a day and a half, almost 2 days, and then we got out there and discovered these tracks. So they weren't washed out at all. And if it had rained, if they had been left and then if it had rained and then and they had been left before the rain, they would have been somewhat washed out, and the detail would have been washed out somewhat. And that wasn't the case. They were like fresh and pristine. I mean, some of the best tracks that I've casted, actually, because
the measurements on those, Shane? I'm sorry. They were
that particular track there, that's the 9.5-inch tracks that we're getting now.
Okay.
And there's, oh gosh, I think on that trackway, I believe I casted 15 or 16 tracks, and the tracks were so good, and there were so many that like I was able to take the time and like pick out the best tracks. And not only that, but I casted some where the toes are splayed. I casted some where the toes are scrunched up and like in grabbing different positions of the foot, and so that we could see, the main thing that we're going to start showing with all these tracks that we've collected over the years out there is that in the same trackway, the same foot can look different 5 or 6 tracks up depending on the substrate. And there's a lot of coloring outside the lines at times with these tracks. If they're pushing off to the right or to the left, and where the pressure points are, if they're pivoting at all as they push off, it can create nuances in the tracks that aren't really part of the exact track, if you follow me.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of had it in mind. I wanted to show how the positioning of the foot, what the foot is doing, can change the shape of the track and whatnot.
So, hey, Shane, what are you doing, or how are you distinguishing this from a human footprint?
So, if you were able to see the video of these tracks, I moved the camera in different positions, and you can see the amount of pushback that are in these tracks. At times, the mud is pushed back so far and so hard that where the heel is drops off, and the mud is there's almost a straight, solid, flat wall inside the front of where the heel is, because the mud is being pushed back so hard. And we've videoed this and documented this several different times. I've done this myself, and we've done this with the film crew that's out with us, but we went out and walked in the same mud flat, in the same mud as these tracks, and trying to create the pushback that are left in these tracks. I did it. We had we didn't have her do it, but we have a female Emmy award-winning documentary filmmaker that's hanging out with us and following us and doing some of this research with us now. And she went out and left some tracks on her own to see if she could create some of that pushback. And crazy enough, in her trackway, her first 2 tracks, her third and fourth track in the trackway created some pushback. Now you can see that her foot is definitely human because she has a really, really visible hard arch. But if you look at these tracks now, I'm not going to go out on a limb and say that these things don't have arches and that these tracks don't show arches, because they do. And I also have adult tracks that show arches, that are outside the human size for tracks. You know, the common theme out there is that these things have a mid-tarsal joint and that they do not have arches. Arches are a human characteristic. Great apes do not have arches. They have mid-tarsal joints, and we're seeing arches in these. We have a biologist that's a bipedal specialist also, that is not Dr. Meldrum, who is working with us, and he is pointing out all 3 arches in these tracks. And for me, I even hate saying this, but it is what it is. But this makes it more difficult for us to show and prove that these are juvenile tracks, because there are slight arches that are showing in these tracks. And
well, I think Dr. Meldrum has even mentioned that the flat-footed thing kind of happens later on as the animal gets heavier. It kind of pushes the arch out, so it might actually be common to have an arch.
He will not say that they have a lateral anterior arch.
Okay.
He will not say that. And typically you just won't address it. And and I've had conversation with him with some of my other tracks, some of my adult tracks, and I'm not trying to say he thinks this way or what, but it seems to me as though that he doesn't want to get too involved in the juvenile tracks because they're harder to distinguish from human tracks. And it's what we're seeing is the foot grows, it starts to flatten out and widen out. And you would have to assume too, as they get bigger, like once they hit puberty, they start, gaining muscle and become more robust and really start growing and getting bigger. That weight is going to flatten out their feet also. But we have on video several times of us trying to create these same types of tracks that are out there. Like we have these tracks going into the water in December, adult tracks and juvenile tracks together. There's there's not many people they're gonna let their and smaller. Like we have at one point I had when I first got out there were 8-inch tracks going into the water in the middle of winter. And with 12-inch tracks alongside, and no parent is going to let their kids go in the water in the middle of winter.
Right, and no adult's going to be that crazy to do it either. So,
well, you'd be surprised down here in these parts.
But the adult foots that you are seeing, the adult footprints that you are seeing, do they have the mid-tarsal break?
Yes and no. Okay. And all I can do is go off the tracks that we're getting and the casts and what those show. And we are seeing the pushback coming from what we're seeing. The pushback in the juvenile tracks is coming more from the ball of the foot versus a mid-tarsal joint.
Okay.
And then there's some tracks that look as though the pushback is starting back further, like a possible part mid-tarsal joint. So, like, I'm open to the possibility of them having both. For all we know, that may be the case. You don't hear much about the lateral anterior arch, and people don't discuss it much. And it's been said publicly by several people that they don't have that particular arch. The other two are there, but the interior is not. And like I can show you pictures of some of these people holding up adult tracks that show an interior arch, and they're holding them. If there's on the inside of that foot, if there's curvature, that's showing that there's an arch there. And we have these tracks where so in this particular trackway that the one we just looked at, that particular trackway, where that trackway came in to the mud flats, it came from gravel, and the area where it first came in had some grass in it, and the viscosity of the mud was way stiffer and more solid, and that pushback isn't in those tracks. And you can and like I have some really good solid, flat tracks with no push off or anything that I casted out of this trackway. And that you really, like, the viscosity of the substrate was perfect. You get to see what the foot actually looks like because they weren't pushing off hard. It looks as though they had slowed down once they hit that area. And like I said, we believe that they're collecting mussels also. So these tracks aren't just walking out through. At times they're meandering and moving from side to side. They may step over and stop and then push off back. And so these are the things that I'm studying within the trackways, is, you know, how their movement is changing the tracks themselves, so that I understand what I'm seeing, you know, when I look at these casts, and it gives us some idea of their locomotion, like in a substrate like mud, if they're pushing off differently, and you know, and how of course the substrate affects the track that is left. So we've pulled a lot of information out of these tracks, and a lot of people think, oh, tracks, you know, tracks are tracks, we're not going to gain anything else out of them. Well, if you can track the same individuals over a long period of time, there is a lot to learn from these damn tracks. I mean, just a ton. Tracks
are the solid evidence that we have. Tracks are so important. I agree with you, Shane. They're very, very important. Getting back to the family structure thing, have you seen any kind of, like, or, you know, observed or just had an idea of maybe the pregnancy pattern of the females?
No.
Okay.
We have not. I have no idea of what their gestation period would be. I can tell you just from the tracks and the juveniles that have been present in these 3 locations that typically there is about the 2 juveniles that will typically be close in age and close in size. Typically their feet are about an inch to an inch and a half different. And so that kind of gives the notation that they're having a child, and just like, say, if we guess their gestation is 9 months, like a human, right? Just to have some kind of standard to guess. It seems as though they're having one, and then soon thereafter becoming pregnant again and having a second child, and then they're waiting till the youngest child is, we don't know how big their feet are when they're born, right? But the smallest tracks that we found have been 6 inches at all 3 sites. I have seen and know of a track that is smaller, that is about 4.5 inches, I believe, 4 to 4.5 inches. It's actually one of the best track castings I've ever seen, but he doesn't show it publicly much. But anyway, we don't know how old they are when their feet are 6 inches, but we do know that when there's a 6-inch track, typically there's an 8 to 8.5, which would lead us to believe that there's about a 2 to 2.5 year period before they have another child. Yeah. Which means that if their gestation was 9 months, that they're waiting a little over a year to become pregnant again after they have 2 in a row.
And that could also do a lot with breastfeeding. Just in even in humans, you know, you are not producing eggs when you are breastfeeding, or you're not dropping eggs.
Right. Well, one of the thoughts.
Yeah, it's hard to get pregnant when you're breastfeeding.
One of the thoughts that we've had, just because of the types of interaction that we've had with the juvies, it seems as though they are purposely having 2 children back to back, and these 2 juvies, when we're getting interaction from juveniles, it's always like a team effort, right? It's typically 2 juvies, 1 on each side of camp, communicating back and forth, rotating around at times. You know, one may make some noise up here while one's getting in close, like 20 yards to camp, and, you know, spying from the creek or whatever. So it's almost like they purposely have 2 together so that they can work together and learn together. It as far as a survival type thing, it may be easier for them to have two juveniles working together, helping the family,
Looking out for each other.
yeah. And one of the other things we noticed too is that when I find the male's tracks in another area on the property, and I find the other sets of tracks with him occasionally at times, but it's rare. Typically, the juvies tend to be with the adult female. Like when they come down and they're collecting mussels in the mud flats, we never find the male's tracks down there. It's always the mother and the juvies. So it's like they're going out and collecting, and the male is going off and hunting, possibly. Like
so he's the hunter and the mom's the gatherer.
Yeah. Like we find deer kills on the northeast end of the property, and all this action and stuff that we have going on is on the southwest side of the property. And so he's killing the deer on the other side of the property, even though there's tons of deer where we're at and where they're at, where we have all this stuff happening. But he's typically, I find his deer kills in a particular holler. He tends to leave them in one area.
Wow. So that's fascinating too. Before we start winding down, we got to ask Shane about the holes that he's finding. So I'm just going to let you explain it. So I'm going to try to share a screen too.
Okay. So one of the things that I've been finding for quite some time, I think I found my first hole in the 400 after I'd been there maybe a year, and I came across a hole that had been dug that had a stick in it.
Oh.
And what I didn't think about at the time is it had rained about 24 hours before I found that hole. So that hole right there, that one in particular, and there's another one that I sent you, those are from the Oklahoma trip that we recently went to. So I'll get into that momentarily, but these holes I started finding in the 400, and I typically find them within 24 hours of a good rain. We only find these holes when we know that there's a small one in the, at the time. So like when we're finding 6-inch tracks, we're also finding these holes. In October of last year, it was actually the first time the film crew came in with us. We found the 6-inch tracks, and the 6-inch tracks went to the hole, and the stick was still in the hole. The sticks will have, dirt on the end of it. So something is digging holes and leaving the sticks in it. So this was happening. This has happened in the 400. And it stops at a certain point. It's like when these tracks start hitting like 7 inches and up, we don't find those holes anymore. So it's like the young ones, the very young ones, are doing this for some reason. Possibly, who knows, worms or grubs. It's after a rain, so I would assume that they're maybe going after worms and grubs. That's our best, our best idea on it. But crazy enough, we had this trip to Oklahoma recently, and we went out to an area on a creek called Sandy Creek that's pretty well known in that area for having sightings up and down it. And we were taking a lady out with the film crew to this church where she had an encounter. So we were taking her back to where she had an encounter when she was in high school. And from there, because Sandy Creek ran through that area, Randy got on Google Earth, and we kind of pinpointed an area on Sandy Creek that we wanted to get to. And we invited a local tracker in to go out with me while Randy scouted out ahead of us with the thermal drone. And we hit this creek, me and this local tracker. And as we got closer to the area that we had pegged that we wanted to get to, we came across some tracks in the gravel, and then up on the bank. This creek, the banks are like anywhere from 10 to 15 foot high. So every time you go down in the creek into these sandbars, you're going back up out to get out, So found a track up there. And then as we made our way around the bend and we got into this particular area that we wanted to get to, that was maybe a mile out from where we had started, I'm ahead of the local tracker, and I come across a hole with a stick in it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm in Oklahoma and I just found one of these. I was like, he comes up and I'm excited, and he's like, what's with all the excitement? I'm showing him this hole, and he's thinking, wow, I've never thought to look for these. I may have like walked right over these several times, over the years out here tracking
that's
and
the first
stuff.
time I've ever heard of that.
So
And
I'm
how about you?
examining.
Yeah.
I'm examining this hole and taking some video and pictures of it. And we had a camera and a boom mic lady. We only have 3 people that we allow to go out with us, and 2 of them were with us at the time. One was back with Randy filming him, but I'm hollering at them because they'd stopped to get some B-roll footage. And on this bend just before this area. But anyway, I'm examining this hole and taking pictures, and the other tracker goes on out ahead of me, and 15 yards up, he comes across another one. And so at that point, it was starting to get dark, and we had, I wanted to stay and keep looking and like keep moving forward, because I would expect to find more evidence at that point. We got some tracks, we have some dug holes, which tells me that there's a young one, 5, 6, 7-inch tracks, maybe possible going forward from there. But we kind of had an itinerary, and we had other people at the campsite that we were staying at. We had like 20, 30 people that came into camp with us and hang out and tell their stories on film for us and things like that. But these holes are an anomaly. Like if you ask me, I'm going to say the young Sasquatch are doing this for some reason. Other people may not see it that way, but they're not in my situation looking at the data that we're looking at either, So it's an interesting thing. Like I said, we find them.
Super interesting. It's definitely something that we've never heard of.
I heard of it.
I had not.
Last night one.
Oh, okay.
Well, we've had these holes dug on the trail right next to camp. All around camp, after a rain, I'll go out 24 hours after a rain around camp and start, scoping and looking for tracks and whatnot. And I'll come across these holes, and they'll be like 20, 30 yards from camp in the thicket, so they're,
and most people never even think of looking for that.
Well, we're going to have to keep our eyes open for that. That's for sure. But yeah, and so, we're going to start winding down now, Shane. But we did want to ask you, so where are you going to be speaking this year, or how can the audience keep up with you?
And the film, and then when you've got film going on, how can they keep up with that too?
So I'm kind of a little more low key. I don't put out a lot of stuff. I've got a little private group on Facebook, but there's like 30 people in it, just like my close acquaintances and friends. Okay. And we tend to post a lot of stuff on Randy Harrington's Facebook page. Okay. And then Randy Harrington's YouTube channel, he's been posting a lot of video from the trips that we can post on there. And then I've got a YouTube channel. It's Ozark Mountain Sasquatch. I have not put anything on there in a few years, but you can get the back. Yeah. You can get the backstory, of everything and how it all started at all the way up until the 400. And after I put out some videos for the first couple of years of being in the 400, but once I brought in the guys and the team and tried to create the situation that we're in now, I kind of quit putting stuff out as we're documenting all this, and we have the crew, out with us, documenting this with us. And as far as that goes, I can't even give you a timeline of when that may come out. We're like, at this point, when Cynthia came in, she's one of the directors, and I say director, I use that term loosely because there's no directing. She's a documentary filmmaker, and so they're there just doing what they do and is documenting everything that we do, right? And we're like 100% being us. No holds barred. Like there's going to be a lot of beeps and a lot of things, taken out and whatnot, because we're doing what we're doing, and we're being us 100%, But she came in as a skeptic. The other director is a full-on believer. And he's the one that he contacted me several years ago, and we became really good friends, but, and it kind of led into this, but, her first day, Cynthia's first day there, she had been there an hour, and her and Blair, the other camera lady, had a they watched something black run down the dry creek bed when they basically went down the trail, crossed into the thicket between the trail and their creek, and they were finding their own little spot to, go potty and whatnot. And
right.
Blair was digging, and Cynthia looked up and watched something black run down the creek on all fours.
That'll make you a believer pretty quick.
Right. Well, she's still not a believer. She's still skeptical because in her mind, it could have been a bear. It could have been a hog, even though it didn't look like a hog to her. It didn't have a tail, so she thinks it could have been a bear. But like, I'm a tracker, and there has never been a bear seen on the property. There has never been a bear track found on the property. There's never been a cougar track found on the property. Like, if they were out there, I would know, and they're just, those things, they're not out there. It's that simple. So I think she's kind of struggling with that somewhat, like, our goal is to make her a believer by the time we're done. And at this point, originally, she wanted to come in and, like, if nothing happened, it would just be about me and Randy, because that's really what she was interested in the most originally, coming from her viewpoint. Nothing happens, it'll be about you and Randy, no big deal. Well, they're going to be filming with us for a total of a year right now at this point, which we started last October, and we're actually going to go to probably December this year. Okay. And then reassess the situation. But we're basically, this is going to end up being a docu-series. Okay. And
we look forward to seeing it.
Sounds like a named super, it, right? All right.
No, there's no name yet. Like, she's having to go out of her kind of box. Like, she's contemplating narrating this, because what happened was she came out to be behind the scenes and do what she does. And she was, after being there an hour, she had to come back to camp and get on camera and explain what she just saw. So she was immediately thrusted into the scene in front of the camera. So now at this point, like, everybody is part of it, because everybody is having these experiences with us. Their first trip out there, it was 2 days before we were going to speak at the first Missouri conference here. And Scott Nelson was one of the speakers also. And 2 days before that conference, we were out with the film crew. Like, literally, we came out of the woods the morning of the conference and went back to the woods after we got done speaking. But we captured Samurai Chatter 2 days before going to that conference and hanging out with Scott Nelson. Yeah, it was like, it couldn't have happened any better, That's and amazing. They were present for that too. So, like, they're having these experiences, so they've been thrusted into this, and it's just not me and Randy and Dan Nedrolo on film now. Like, it's about us as a whole now, and people are going to get to see how they're reacting to these things that me and Randy are used to,
Yeah, and, it's so nice to bring in some normal people,
yeah,
just like, who don't have any kind of influence, and you put them in that situation. But it's
we're excited.
Yeah, we are excited. We're so and like, there's so much to you, Shane. Like, there's so many stories, and like it's probably like too much for just 1 hour.
We could do a docu-series here just on you.
Definitely.
That's kind of what's happening.
Yeah, we're
that's kind of what's happening with me and Randy.
We're gonna have to have
I'd be glad to.
You and Randy Harrington, and
maybe we'll do like a little thing. Like, maybe we can see Shane when we're in Missouri. Wouldn't that be awesome?
That would be great. So
yeah, just let me know when you're coming down, and if I'm available, we'll get together.
Woo! That would be super cool.
Shane, this was amazing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shane. You were chocked full of super, super interesting things. Like,
thank you. Yeah, I did want to mention. So I mentioned the Missouri conference last year. So it was the first ever Southwest Missouri conference by a lady, great woman. Her name's Mary. She went out on a limb and did this last year to see if, she could make it successful, make it worth doing it. And it went pretty good. So she's having the second annual, Missouri Bigfoot conference. It's going to be in September in Ozark, Missouri. And
man, we're going to be there in August.
Yeah. We'll be she has a website that's getting ready to go public that'll have all the info and stuff, and it'll be shared all over Facebook. But we've got Daniel Perez. Daniel Perez is coming in to speak.
Oh, cool. We love
We
Daniel.
have a biologist that's working with us, John Morley out of Texas. He's going to be giving two amazing presentations. Like, people will want to hear what he has to say. It's pretty astonishing, some of the things that he has to go over, and several really good speakers. And then me and Randy will be speaking also, and we're doing some extracurricular stuff too, where we have one of the properties that we researched. We're going to take about 20 people out the evening before and do a night of research, and barbecue and dinner around the campfire with the speakers and stuff. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
It does sound like fun.
Maybe we will have to make another trip out.
We'll make another trip.
So
But
Shane,
thanks again, Shane. We really appreciate
awesome.
you being on the show. We really do.
Absolutely. Thanks for having
It's been
me.
awesome, honey.
And we'll catch up with you real soon.
Absolutely.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Thanks, Shane. Gosh, we could have had him for another
I
hour.
know. It could at least another hour.
Oh my
it's
God,
just-
he's got
it's
so much stuff. There's like so many questions
And
I still wanted to ask him.
I know, as usual, as we say this every episode, we don't get to half of the questions, and I've cut my questions down.
I know, but I really
It's
feel like
just-
I learned a lot.
Oh my gosh!
Like
yeah.
some new stuff. Like, because I don't think we got so much information before about juveniles
Mhm.
or even about the stick digging. Because that's kind of interesting and kind of cool, because young people, humans do that. Young
Right,
kids
right.
do that. They dig with sticks. So it makes a lot of sense. So
Yeah.
that was definitely like another thing that maybe we need to look out for.
Mhm.
So, but we
So,
really
yeah.
appreciate you guys all being here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. You can follow us on the Bigfoot Influencers podcast. Actually, it's the bigfootinfluencers.com,
Mhm.
but you can follow us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter. You can follow us on Instagram. And
Untold Radio AM
Yep.
Network.
And we
Yeah.
appreciate your comments, and we love answering and chatting back with you in the comment section. So don't forget to leave us a comment. Make sure it's a nice comment.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Okay,
Thank you
guys.
guys. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.